It was a cold November evening when Sarah Mitchell's life changed forever. The young waitress at Vittorio's restaurant in downtown Chicago was about to close when she saw that elderly man sitting on the steps, shivering in the freezing cold. Against all company rules, Sarah brought him a hot plate of pasta and a blanket. The owner, Marcus Thompson, caught her in the act and fired her immediately, shouting that he didn't want people attracting vagrants to his establishment. But what neither Sarah nor Marcus knew was that this apparently homeless man was actually William Harrison, the billionaire who had disappeared 3 months earlier, a food industry magnate who had lost his memory in an accident and was living on the streets, observing how people behave when they think you're nobody. And that night, Sarah had just passed the most important test of her life without knowing it. Sarah Mitchell was 25 years old and had been working as a waitress at Vittorio's restaurant for 3 years. It was an upscale establishment in downtown Chicago, frequented by business executives and wealthy tourists. Sarah dreamed of opening her own small restaurant someday, but for now she was content serving tables and saving every penny possible. That November evening, the restaurant had closed at 11. Sarah was cleaning the last tables when, through the window, she noticed a figure huddled on the entrance steps. It was an elderly man with a long gray beard and worn clothes. He was visibly shaking from the particularly bitter cold that night. Sarah knew the restaurant's rules well. Marcus Thompson, the owner, had been clear from day one. He didn't want beggars or homeless people near the establishment because they ruined the image and drove away clientele. But looking at that man who seemed about to collapse from the cold, Sarah couldn't ignore the voice of her conscience. Without thinking too much, she prepared a plate of spaghetti marinara that was still hot and took a wool blanket from the staff closet. She left the restaurant and approached the man gently. The elderly man looked up when Sarah knelt beside him. His eyes were an intense blue, surprisingly clear for someone in his condition. He didn't seem under the influence of alcohol or drugs, just terribly tired and confused. Sarah offered him the hot plate and wrapped him in the blanket. The man looked at her with disbelief, as if he couldn't believe someone was taking care of him. When he began to eat, tears started streaming down his cheeks. What Sarah didn't know was that this man was William Harrison, the owner of one of the largest restaurant chains in America. 3 months earlier, William had been driving home from his Lake Michigan estate when a truck had rear-ended him. The accident had caused severe head trauma and a form of amnesia that doctors called dissociative fugue. William couldn't remember his name, his identity, his fortune. He only remembered fragments. He knew how to cook, recognized food quality, had vague memories of elegant restaurants. Discharged from the hospital without documents and without memory, he had ended up on the streets. No one had connected this homeless man with the important businessman who had disappeared. The police had concluded he had probably fallen into the lake during the accident. While Sarah watched him eat, William observed her every gesture. He had spent 3 months on the streets, experiencing the worst side of humanity. People ignored him, insulted him, chased him away. But this young woman was treating him with a kindness he had forgotten existed. The peaceful moment was interrupted by the sound of a car stopping in front of the restaurant. Sarah turned and saw Marcus Thompson's black BMW. The owner got out of the car with his face twisted in anger. He had forgotten his wallet and had come back to get it when he saw Sarah with the homeless man. Marcus approached with furious steps, shouting about not wanting this riffraff near his restaurant. Sarah tried to explain that the man was dying of cold, but Marcus interrupted her brusquely. He didn't care about explanations. Rules were rules, and she was ruining the establishment's reputation. He fired her on the spot. Sarah felt her world crashing down. That job was her only source of income, and without it, she couldn't pay rent on her small apartment. But looking at the elderly man who was watching her with gratitude, she didn't regret her choice. William, despite his mental confusion, understood perfectly what was happening. That girl had sacrificed her job to help a stranger, a gesture of pure humanity that he, in his years as a wealthy businessman, had rarely seen. That night, as Sarah returned home without a job, but with a clear conscience, and William fell asleep warm under the blanket she had given him, neither imagined that their destinies would intertwine in extraordinary ways. In the days following her firing, Sarah began the difficult search for a new job. Chicago was full of restaurants, but finding a stable position wasn't easy, especially without positive references. Marcus Thompson took every opportunity to discredit her with other restaurant owners in the area. Sarah couldn't forget that elderly man. Every morning, before starting her round of job applications, she passed by the restaurant to see if he was still there. William had taken to sitting on that nearby bench, observing the flow of people. The third morning, Sarah found him coughing violently. The previous night it had rained, and he had gotten completely soaked. Without hesitating, Sarah took him to her small studio apartment a few blocks away. Sarah's apartment was modest, a studio with a bed, a small kitchenette, and a tiny bathroom. But for William, who had slept under bridges for months, it seemed like a palace. Sarah had him sit on the bed, made him a cup of hot tea, and called a family doctor she knew. Dr. Martinez examined William and diagnosed early pneumonia. He prescribed antibiotics and complete rest. Sarah didn't hesitate for a moment. This man would stay with her until he recovered completely. During the days of convalescence, Sarah and William began to get to know each other. He couldn't remember his past, but when Sarah cooked, his eyes lit up. He had an extraordinary palate, could recognize every ingredient, and suggest recipe improvements with expertise that surprised Sarah. Sarah began to suspect that this man wasn't just any homeless person. The way he held his silverware, how he moved in the kitchen, even the way he spoke revealed refined education. But she never asked intrusive questions, respecting his obvious discomfort when trying to remember the past. Meanwhile, Sarah continued job hunting without success. Her savings were running out rapidly, especially with extra medicine and food for William. One evening, while doing the expense calculations, she couldn't hide her worry. William saw her count and recount the few remaining bills. He realized he was becoming a burden to her, but Sarah reassured him with determination. For her, he wasn't a burden. He was like the grandfather she never had. Those words touched William deeply. In the fragments of memory he could recover, he didn't remember ever hearing someone speak to him with such genuine affection. The next day, while Sarah was out for job interviews, William decided to take a walk. He felt better and wanted some fresh air. Walking through downtown Chicago, he stopped in front of a bookstore window displaying cooking and restaurant magazines. One cover caught his attention. There was a photo of an elegant man in a suit and tie, with well-groomed hair and no beard, but those blue eyes were unmistakably his. The headline read, "William Harrison, the mystery of the missing restaurant king." William stared at that photo for long minutes, feeling something move in his mind. He entered the bookstore and bought the magazine with the few coins he had. Sitting on a park bench, he began reading the article that told his life story. Son of restaurateurs, he had built a culinary empire, owned 50 restaurants across America, had an estate on Lake Michigan. But the more he read, the more confused he felt. That man in the photo seemed to live in a completely different world from his, a world made of success, money, and power, but which strangely seemed empty and cold to him. The memories began to return slowly, like pieces of a puzzle coming together. He returned to Sarah's home in a state of agitation that she noticed immediately. William showed her the magazine, telling her everything he had discovered. Sarah was speechless, staring alternately at the photo and the man she had welcomed into her home. William confirmed he believed he was that person, but added something that surprised Sarah. He didn't want to return to that life. In those days with her, he had felt something he didn't remember ever experiencing. The happiness of being accepted for who he was, not for what he owned. The night after the discovery, Sarah couldn't sleep. The man she had taken in wasn't just any homeless person, but a billionaire who owned a restaurant empire. She felt overwhelmed by 1,000 questions about what would happen when the world discovered that William Harrison was alive. William seemed to read her thoughts. He explained that those days with her had been the most genuine of his life. He had read the article that spoke of a successful but lonely man, without family or real friends. Sarah had given him more love in a week than he had received in 50 years of wealth. The next morning, William made a shocking decision. He shaved his beard, cut his hair, and put on clean clothes. When he looked in the mirror, he saw William Harrison, the restaurant magnate, again. He told Sarah he was about to reclaim what was his, but not in the way she thought. William went to his bank, using his fingerprints to access his accounts. He withdrew a considerable sum, then went to a trusted lawyer. Meanwhile, Sarah received a phone call from Marcus Thompson. He had to return to the restaurant immediately because someone wanted to speak with her. Sarah arrived at Vittorio's to find Marcus in extreme agitation. When he saw her, he rushed over, apologizing profusely for the other night. At the corner table sat an elegant man in a dark suit. When he stood up, Sarah recognized those blue eyes, even though everything else was transformed. It was William, but he seemed like a different person. He emanated a natural authority she had never seen before. He formally introduced himself as William Harrison, leaving Marcus on the verge of fainting. William announced he wanted to buy the restaurant at a price above market value, but with two conditions. Sarah would become the new owner and manager, while Marcus would no longer have anything to do with the establishment. Sarah looked at William as if seeing him for the first time, while Marcus processed in disbelief what he had just heard. The following weeks were a whirlwind of changes that Sarah struggled to process. William had kept his word. Vittorio's restaurant had become Sarah's place, and she was the official owner. But William had done much more. He had completely transformed the establishment, investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in a renovation that made it one of Chicago's most elegant restaurants. New furnishings, state-of-the-art professional kitchen, a wine cellar with premium selections. Everything Sarah had always dreamed of. During this period, Sarah and William worked side by side every day. She discovered that behind the powerful businessman's facade—
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
—was still the sweet and vulnerable man she had cared for in her studio. William, for his part, rediscovered his passion for the restaurant business that he had lost over the years, seeing everything through Sarah's enthusiastic eyes. One evening, after the restaurant closed, Sarah and William sat at the table where it all began. The place was quiet, illuminated only by the soft lights of the new decor. William poured 2 glasses of premium Napa Valley wine and confessed to Sarah that he had something important to tell her. In all those years of success, he had never been truly happy. He had everything money could buy, but lived in a golden prison. He had no real friends, only people interested in his money. He had no family, only employees and business partners. Then he had lost his memory, ended up on the streets, and discovered who people were when they thought you were nobody. He had seen the worst of humanity, but he had also met her. Sarah felt tears stinging her eyes. In the previous months, she had seen William transform day by day, recovering not only his memory, but also his joy in living. William continued explaining that she had shown him what it meant to love without interest, to give without expecting anything in return. She had taught him that true wealth isn't measured in dollars, but in moments of shared happiness. He stood up and knelt beside Sarah's chair, pulling out a small velvet box with a ring that sparkled in the soft light. A simple but perfect diamond, set on a white gold band. But more than the ring, what moved Sarah was what she saw in William's eyes. Not the confidence of a rich man used to getting everything, but the vulnerability of someone who had found love and was afraid of losing it. Sarah confessed she had loved him since that first evening in the rain, when he was just a man who needed help. She loved him for how he had changed her life, but especially for how she had changed his. When William asked if it was a yes, Sarah replied by throwing her arms around his neck. The wedding was celebrated 3 months later in the garden of the Lake Michigan estate that William had completely renovated. Not a lavish ceremony, but an intimate event with their dearest friends and restaurant employees who had become like family. During the celebration, Sarah noticed that William had also invited some of the homeless people he had met during his months on the streets. He had them dressed elegantly and treated them with the same respect given to other guests. When Sarah asked why he had invited them, William replied that they knew how to recognize true love when they saw it. They had been the ones to teach him that dignity had nothing to do with money. That evening, as they danced under the stars reflected in the lake, Sarah and William knew they had found something rare, a love born from altruism, grown in difficulty, and consolidated by the daily choice to put the other first. But their story didn't end with marriage. Together, they decided to use part of William's fortune to open a chain of free soup kitchens for the homeless throughout America. Places where people in need could not only eat a hot meal, but be treated with dignity and respect. A year after the wedding, Sarah and William had transformed their personal love into a mission that was changing the lives of thousands of people. The Open Hearts Foundation now managed 15 soup kitchens for the homeless across America, and the number grew every month. The most important project was what they were building in Chicago. They had purchased an entire city block in the neighborhood where Sarah had grown up and were constructing an integrated center, free cafeteria, temporary dormitories, medical services, and professional training courses to help people get off the streets. Sarah had discovered she had a natural talent for organization and management of social projects. William had rediscovered the meaning of his business empire, transforming it from a profit-making machine into a tool for doing good. One spring morning, while Sarah was checking the construction of the new center, she received a surprising phone call. It was Marcus Thompson, the former restaurant owner who had fired her. Marcus asked to meet her, saying it was important. Sarah agreed to see him at a coffee shop near the construction site. When she arrived, she found Marcus completely changed. He had lost weight, looked aged, and there was a bitterness in his eyes that Sarah had never seen. Marcus told her that after selling the restaurant, his life had fallen apart. He had invested the money badly and lost everything. His wife had left him, his children no longer spoke to him. He confessed that the night he fired her, he had made the biggest mistake of his life. He wasn't asking for money or help, Marcus explained. He was just asking for forgiveness. Sarah had done the right thing that evening, and he had punished her for it. He would carry that with him for the rest of his life. Sarah looked at the man who had once humiliated her, and instead of feeling anger or satisfaction, she felt only compassion. William's love had changed her deeply, making her capable of forgiving even those who had hurt her. Sarah told him she forgave him, and if he really wanted to change, there was a place in their center where he could be useful. They needed someone to coordinate food donations from restaurants around the city. He knew all the owners, understood how the industry worked. Marcus looked at her incredulously. Sarah wasn't offering him a job, but a chance at redemption, just as someone had offered her and her husband. That evening, Sarah told William about the meeting with Marcus. William listened silently, then smiled with that sweetness Sarah loved so much. He told her she had done well because revenge doesn't heal wounds, only forgiveness can. 6 months later, during the official opening of the Open Hearts Center, Sarah looked at the crowd of people filling the large hall. There were former homeless people who now had jobs and homes, volunteers who dedicated their time to others, city officials inspired by their example. On stage, beside her, William gave the opening speech. But the words that touched Sarah most were the final ones, when he looked into her eyes, saying that everything had started with a simple gesture. A girl who had offered a hot meal to a stranger. Sarah had taught him that true love is recognized by actions, not words. In that moment, Sarah understood that their story wasn't just about love between two people, but an example of how love can expand and touch the lives of thousands of others. As applause filled the hall, Sarah thought of that November evening when it all began with a plate of pasta and a blanket. 5 years after that cold November evening that had changed everything, Sarah and William found themselves once again on the steps of the former Vittorio's restaurant, now Sarah's place. But this time, they weren't alone. Between them was Sophia, their 2-year-old daughter, walking unsteadily while holding both parents' hands. The neighborhood around them was completely transformed. The Open Hearts Center had become a reference point for all of Chicago, and their model had been replicated in 50 American cities. But more than numbers and recognition, what filled Sarah's heart was seeing the faces of people who had managed to rebuild their lives. Like Robert, the former engineer who had lost everything to gambling and now directed one of the recovery centers. Like Maria, the single mother who had ended up on the streets with her children and now managed a cooking workshop, teaching trades to young people in difficulty. Like Marcus Thompson, who had become the most effective coordinator of the food recovery project and had regained his children's respect. That evening, they were all gathered to celebrate a special milestone. Sarah had been named Woman of the Year by the city of Chicago for her social commitment. But, for her, the greatest prize was watching William play with Sophia in the small park they had built next to the center. During the celebration, William took Sarah aside and led her to the place where it all began, the bench where she had found him that first evening. William told her that sometimes he stopped to think about what their lives would have been like if she had walked past that night, if she hadn't stopped to help him. Sarah rested her head on his shoulder, replying that she never could have walked past. Her grandmother always told her that when you meet someone who needs help, it's God testing you, and she didn't want to disappoint either her grandmother or herself. William squeezed her hand, the same hand that 5 years earlier had offered him a hot meal, saving his life. He confessed he had understood that he hadn't lost his memory by chance. He had to forget who he was to discover who he wanted to become. He had to lose everything to understand what really mattered. Sarah asked what really mattered, even though she already knew the answer. William pointed to Sophia running toward them, laughing, explaining that this mattered. A family built on love. People who take care of each other without asking for anything in return. The ability to make a difference in others' lives. Sophia arrived with flushed cheeks from running and climbed onto Daddy's lap, asking why everyone was crying that evening. Sarah and William looked at each other and burst out laughing, realizing they both had tears in their eyes. Sarah explained to the child that they were tears of happiness, that sometimes when you're very happy, you cry. Sophia exclaimed that she was happy too, and asked if she could cry too, making her parents laugh. That night, while Sophia slept in her room decorated with drawings of stars and rainbows, Sarah and William sat on their house's balcony looking at the city lights. Sarah thought about the new center they were about to open in New York the next day, but William said that evening he just wanted to stay there with her and think about how lucky they were. Sarah nestled in his arms, feeling completely at home. In 5 years, they had managed to build not only an empire of solidarity, but a family based on solid values and authentic love. Before falling asleep, Sarah asked William if he thought Sophia would someday understand how special their story was. William replied that he was sure of it, and hoped that when she grew up, she too would have the courage to stop and help someone in need. While Sarah fell asleep in his arms, William stayed awake a little longer, looking at the stars above Chicago. He thought about all the what-ifs that could have changed their story, but in the end, everything had made sense. Sometimes destiny takes you exactly where you need to be, even if the road seems winding. Sometimes you lose everything to find what really matters. And sometimes, a simple gesture like offering a hot meal to a stranger can change not just 2 lives, but the entire world. Because true love never stops at two people. It expands, spreads, transforms. And when it finds fertile ground in generous hearts, it can perform miracles that no one would have ever imagined. Like if you believe a gesture of kindness can change everything. Comment which moment of the story touched you most. Share to inspire those who still have faith in human goodness. Subscribe for more stories of love, born from altruism. Sometimes those who seem to have nothing actually have everything to give. Sometimes those who have everything discover they never had anything. And sometimes all it takes is a hot meal to save two souls and change the world. Because true love is recognized by actions, not words.